Hello there, everybody, and welcome to the Talking City podcast, brought to you by the Manchester Evening News. My name is Dan Murphy, and joining me today, as ever, is Mr. Simon Bajkowski. Si, long time no speak over Zoom, or whatever software we're using. How's it going?
Yeah, I'm good. I feel better illuminated today. I've put a big light on.
Yeah, you know what? You're glowing. You are glowing.
Yeah, wonderful.
That's what we love to see. Now,
I came back had a brief holiday for a week, and came back and ran into a colleague, and their first words were, "How are you, mate? You look shattered." So
relaxing time away then, was it?
Yeah. Well, I thought I was relaxed, but yeah.
Maybe you were that relaxed. You were still sleeping, and that's why you look tired.
I need all the lighting I can get, basically.
Exactly. Don't we all? But I tell you who else was glowing on Wednesday night. It was, of course, Manchester City. A big game in the Champions League quarterfinals. The first leg against the champions of Germany, Bayern Munich. I think there was confidence City would get the result, but I don't think anyone thought they'd go quite as well as it did, Si, because what a performance. Made even better, I think, by the fact it was like kind of an evenly matched game for most of it. I think Guardiola said afterwards it was actually there was large portions where Bayern were better, especially in the second half, the first 20-25 minutes when they were really going for it. But yet City rolled it out, defended brilliantly, and came away with a stunning 3-0 win, and with 1 foot already in the semi-finals. What a night!
Yeah, it was a really strange game to look back on because, like you say, and Tuchel was disappointed that it was 3-0, and Pep made the point that Bayern were very good. Joshua Kimmich did some media afterwards and said, they were the better team for the first hour, he thought. And you could sort of see some sense in that, but at the same time, that final kind of 20 minutes, it felt like it could have been 6-0, 7-0. We were discussing afterwards, like what mark you'd give out of 10 you'd give the Bayern goalkeeper, because he made some incredible stops like throughout the game,
and then also
towards the end. Yeah,
gave heart attacks to every German in the stadium.
Well, I mean, he sort of very kindly let Bernardo Silva's header through his arms, but then he made so many good saves. You're thinking if it weren't for him, City could have, racked up like a Leipzig or a Burnley score. So it could have been much closer, but it could have been much bigger. So I guess 3-0 is quite good.
Yeah, it was such a weird one because City didn't dominate the possession, a rare occurrence on home soil where they have less than their opponents, only 44%. But yet they had more shots on target, and it seemed to me like a sort of game where Guardiola always goes on about control, and when he talks about it, it's usually in terms of controlling the ball, having the ball. If you've got possession, you can't concede chances unless you give it away in the right in your own box, as Bayern Munich found out to the detriment on several occasions. But his whole philosophy is basically keep hold of the ball as long as possible and don't let your opponents do anything with it. But here, City kind of controlled the game without having the ball. Sort of. I mean, don't get me wrong. Ederson doesn't make one of his own great saves from Leroy Sané, and maybe it's a different game. But I thought the way City kind of almost held Bayern at arm's length at times, especially in that final 20 minutes when they got that second goal. The way most of Bayern's shots were outside the box. They didn't really have any really good chances in the area, unless I'm mistaken. Anything that strikes the mind. So it's like they kept them at arm's length throughout. Bayern were, they're a great team. They've got a lot of good players. Their pace at times did cause bother. Sané, as City fans well know, is brilliant, and he had loads of good chances. Coleman, Gnabry, Musiala, and then when Mane comes on, when you got that amount of attacking talent, Goretzka and Kimmich as well, as you say, they're bound to have chances. But I thought City, it was almost like they were almost like Floyd Mayweather in the match in the boxer style, just kind of keeping your distance and striking when the opportunity kind of presents itself. And I thought it was just so perfect. And as we may touch on, they created the opportunities almost in a kind of Klopp-like fashion, where instead of patient build-up, it was triggering kind of pressing traps and winning the ball high up and being absolutely clinical with it.
Yeah, and again, Tuchel was kind of a bit frustrated because he was like, if you're restricting City to taking a 25, 30-yard shot from outside the, away from the goal, then you're pretty happy. You don't expect Rodri to ping one in on his weaker foot for the opening goal. You're more used to like Kyle Walker smashing it into Rosette or something like that. So Bayern restricted City a bit, but City restricted Bayern more. And Ederson made a couple of good saves. But as you say, they were probably, they were outside the box. There was no like outstanding chance from Bayern. The closest they came was probably Musiala at 0-0 when Ruben Diaz blocked the ball and stopped it going in. But that is kind of like Ederson as well, in that, it's not like we used to Ederson conceding from that kind of distance. It's just that normally City mess up and someone has a really, really good chance to score against him and does so. Whereas, City kind of limited Bayern. I don't think Bayern's expected goals were very, very high. I don't think they were above 1. So it was that is the best kind of collective performance I've seen from City, I think, in the Champions League, and has to be up there for sort of general performance.
Absolutely. I mean, even if we'll talk about the Premier League and everything that's going on over there later on, but in that Southampton game, there was a half an hour in there where City looked far more kind of shaken than they ever did against Bayern, and was it Sulemana, I believe, who was really running City ragged at times, and you could kind of see where, if a player who's just come to the Premier League, 20-year-old, and is really damaging City with his pace, what could the likes of Sane and Mane and Gnabry and Musiala and Coman, what could they do when they're, the elite caliber players? But they never really got a chance to really kind of stretch City or expose any space behind. And I think it was how Guardiola set it up. And I think we were all, the big debate before the match was, will he go back to Walker here? He brought Walker on against Southampton when City were a bit stretched, and he felt like maybe you do the same here with given the strength Bayern have on the wings. But instead, he started with the same back line, but instead of Stones moving into midfield from right back and potentially leaving that flank exposed, he did it from the middle, and I think it was just a genius tweak no one really saw coming, probably including Bayern, and they just never really got any. They didn't really get to isolate any of the fullbacks, and the rare occasions they got to kind of one-on-one, Akanji and Aki both stood tall and won their duels really, really well.
Yeah, I think City played it in the first half at Chelsea in the league back in the start of January, and it was so bad, like really terrible half, and they changed it at half time, and it was much better. But you could kind of tell it was a work in progress. Stones was like coming out of defence to sort of win headers because he'd been kind of tasked with kind of tracking Musiala in that 10 role. But he'd come out and win a header, and then Guardiola would shout at him on the touchline and be like, "No, stay back." So Stones didn't fully know when to stay and when to go, and like what exactly Guardiola wanted. But he's so intelligent on the ball, and his reading of the game, and the whole team really. But yeah, Diaz, so many good challenges or interceptions or blocks. It felt like there was a lot of Bayern getting kind of a sniff of a threat, and you're like, oh, City are in a bit of danger, and then within 2 seconds, like Nathan Ake would have closed the danger down, or Akanji closed the danger down. That it was just an incredibly composed performance, and you kind of think back to the 2020-2021 season when they reached the final, and that was built on having an incredibly tight defence. Because like Guardiola said ahead of this game, they've not had any problem scoring goals. It's been conceding goals that has been their issue. And to keep a clean sheet against Bayern will put so much confidence into the whole sort of team going into the second leg, but also going into the semi-final, assuming they finish the job next week.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I don't know if you managed to see John Stones on BT Sport after the match, but he spoke very interestingly about two things you mentioned there. First, his kind of midfield role. He was quizzed on that, and he said, this is a massive learning curve for me. Sometimes I don't really, pretty much paraphrasing, don't really know what I'm doing at some points. So it's still, it's not natural. It doesn't naturally come to him, I believe, is what he said. Having to his positioning, know when to move, know where to go to make space for others. And naturally so, he's been a defender for 10, 11, 12 years of his career, if not a lot more, and now he's being tasked with doing this, the inverted defender role. I can imagine it's more, it's difficult for anyone, a bit easier for Rico Lewis, who's been brought up doing it since he was a nipper in the City Academy. And then also, he touched on something you've touched on quite a lot on this podcast, where he talked about the blocks City were making and how they celebrated them, and Diaz was chief general in doing that, and Ake as well, and how those little moments, Ederson's saves as well from Sane when the pressure was on. City celebrated those moments. I think Stones appreciated that the fans celebrated those moments as well, and it's those kind of galvanising little snippets of kind of play that don't mean much in the grand scheme of things, but built together, it kind of just creates this sense of, I think, like, assuredness. Like, City never once, even in that period when Bayern were on top, and you wouldn't have been surprised if they scored, but it never really felt like City had the, I suppose they have the backs to the wall a little bit. I think I even wrote that, but it never felt like they were stressing. And I think Stone's saying that we stayed calm, we stayed composed. Everyone knew what they were doing. Yet they're a good team. You're going to have spells when they're in control and they're having chances. But City never seem to panic. And you can sometimes, especially in the Champions League, you can tell sometimes with City where the tide has turned. They can't really stem that tide of, they made one mistake and a goal or a bad decision goes against them. At times they've been unable to shake that, especially the Tottenham match. That was kind of the worst for that, wasn't it? When that goal was disallowed and there was just no stopping the inevitable Spurs winner that came. Whereas now, at least on evidence of that, we'll see after the second leg, of course, they've kind of matured as a group, it seems, and they're just a lot more composed in these massive, massive moments.
Yeah, it was kind of... It's interesting that, they have got this extra solidity. And, yeah, like you say, it's weird to say that they were always in control because they weren't and they didn't have the majority of the ball and Bayern had chances. But in the stadium on the night, it kind of felt like City were always in control.
It wasn't nervy, was it? It was just, never felt frayed or panicky.
No, and I mean, you had the sort of crossovers of like the old school meets massively complex, where you had like the City pressing Bayern really aggressively and all these sort of fluid positions and formations and chasing, and like they had a spell when Haaland nearly chased the goalkeeper down, but like Grealish slid in to win his tackle, Haaland slid in full length, and then someone else slid in at the far post, the far touchline to try and keep the ball in play or win it off a Bayern player. And like those things get the crowd up. Like, it's a really sophisticated press, but it's also just like old school effort and
closing down.
Yeah. And the fans love to see that, and they love to see City celebrating every small victory they can, and those meaty challenges and winning your 50-50s and things like that. For all the sort of fancy football that gets played, there's nothing quite like those kind of things for getting the crowd up, and they certainly did last night. So it all kind of contributed towards this feeling of like City are in charge here.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we've talked about the defensive, and you've touched on it there. The way Guardiola set his team up to press, obviously they were always pressing back. It seemed like a new level of aggression, and Grealish especially. He won the ball off Upamecano. The amount of times they won the Bernardo as well, of course. The amount of times they won the ball in the, I won't say quite final third, but around Bayern's kind of quadrant of the pitch sort of thing. They didn't give him a time to breathe and build up play or give him any time. Time they're probably used to a bit more in the Bundesliga, you'd suspect. And Upamecano, it's almost as if City kind of, if they didn't go into the game with it as a plan, they certainly quickly kind of cornered on him because he was shaky on the ball, and whenever he had it, they just kind of, Grealish, so intelligent that we'll talk about him maybe in a minute how far he's come, but he blocked those passing lanes, as I think Rio Ferdinand pointed out. BT, they closed down those passing lanes. They had nowhere to go. He tried carrying the ball, and his touch was sloppy. And Grealish just won the ball, and great space of mind to him and Haaland to set up that second goal. And that wasn't the only occasion. That was the one occasion it led to the goal. But it could have been a lot more. Again, if Sommer wasn't on it, if De Ligt wasn't playing really well as well, like Upamecano's a weak link in that side. I'd be surprised if he plays in the second leg. And City really exploited it.
Yeah, it was a real collective effort. But in particular, you must absolutely hate playing against Grealish and Bernardo in that form, because they just did not let up for 1 second, really. Time and time again, City just squeezed and squeezed and squeezed. And if you keep doing things like that, then you will get the rewards for it. And City did, and Bayern felt a bit hard done to, and it's those Upamecano mistakes that were punished. But City created so much that they were always going to take some of the chances they created, especially when you've got Haaland on the pitch. But for one of the first times ever this season, the first 2 goals of the match didn't need him. And I mean, I was as shocked as everyone else when he pulled the trigger to shoot for that second goal, and then instead just clipped it to Bernardo Silva. But what an assist! And that kind of summed up just the all action, all collective performance from the team.
Some cross for a tap-in merchant, that is for sure. But he did get his tap-in, inverted commas, to the fullest extent late on. And that third goal, that one does feel significant. It was brilliant. I mean, the header from Stones was fantastic. Yeah. Like, how he got so high. To have, like, the timing to be able to jump then and to have it timed perfectly for the ball to be landed on your head, and then to have the wherewithal at the same time, and then the skill to cushion it into Haaland's path perfectly for him to nod home was excellent. Obviously, Rodri's goal was the goal of the game. There's no denying that. But I thought it was almost route one to a certain extent. A big cross in, a big header, and a big volley in. It was so simple, but in its simplicity, it was just stunning. Like, it was such a great goal, and it feels significant. That one feels like the one where City, and the right to do this, Ake and Rodri have both, and Guardiola as well. The tie's, of course, not over. You've got to go away. You've got to win there as well, as confidently as you did at home. Everything could turn on a sixpence, especially in the Champions League. But that's the goal that kind of feels like they've got it here. I think after the first half, it felt a little bit like City. Oh, you might not have taken all your chances there. You've let someone make a few good saves. You've had a lot of good chances, yet you could maybe feel a bit of, I hope they don't regret those missed chances there. And when Bayern came out guns blazing, it felt like that a little bit. That might have been the story we'd be talking about now. But to kind of wrestle it back, to get the second goal as well, and then the third, it feels like that's the one that makes you think that, bearing disaster, they're in the semis.
Yeah. I mean, City have so much baggage in this competition, and they've led by a goal after the first leg and gone out. They've led by 2 with a minute to spare in the whole tie and gone out. They've led by 2 after the first leg and gone out. So to lead by 3, that is your comfort zone. And 2-0 can very easily become 2-1, but 3-1 is manageable. And also it means if City score on the night in Munich, then City only really need 1 to make it so hard for Bayern to come back. When was the last time City conceded 3 or 4? Really?
United, they conceded 3, but they won 6-3, so it didn't
True.
really matter.
Yeah. That's probably the only time this season. Yeah. But you're talking like such small percentages, and on the flip side of that, if you want to talk bullishly, if City can sort of go close to matching the result from the first leg, then like what an aggregate score to sort of send a message round to everyone else, and whoever wins out the Real Madrid-Chelsea game, to say, we're not messing around here. We've just beaten Bayern home and away, and are ready for whoever comes. So it was, it's the sort of performance and result that will make everyone in Europe sit up and think, wow.
Absolutely. Well, it certainly made us go wow. And I mean, there were so many great performances. We touched on the defenders and a few of the players further forward, but it's hard to narrow down so many good performers. But like, who really stood out for you? I know there was a few 9s in your player ratings, and they were thoroughly deserved. I'm surprised you managed to hold off giving that 10, or is that just reserved for Haaland hat-tricks?
Yeah, only certain Haaland hat-tricks get it, I think.
Skinny's like Roger Ebert, doesn't give out that big 5-star unless it's really, really worth it.
That's the biggest compliment anyone's ever given me, Dan. So thank you.
We're all about giving on this podcast.
Yeah. Yeah, I thought Diaz led amazingly, as ever, and sort of made some really crucial blocks. Nathan Ake as well just seems like he's just in control of every situation. You think, oh, the attacker's got a yard here, and then suddenly they don't. He's just so good, having such a good season. And yeah, I mean, Edison played really well. Stones, excellent. Akanji, who has sort of been the least popular probably out of those 4, but I thought he did really, really well. And playing right back, which isn't his position.
Against Coleman, no less.
Yeah. But again, just didn't seem flustered at all. And you kind of got the sense from the whole defence. Maybe this is why we felt like City were in control. You got the sense that they wouldn't concede. That just like everything was calm at the back.
They weren't getting ripped apart, but that's what I'm saying. Like, Bayern had a lot of the ball, they had good chances, but the good chances were from distance. They never kind of got in behind City or had that one cutback they had, and then you say Diaz was there to block it. I think that was wasn't it? Akanji got rinsed. I think he got rinsed by
by Sane.
Yeah, that's right. So he got rinsed once, but then after that, and he was up against Coleman, I thought he stood him up every time. That was the one time they got a little bit in behind, and then Diaz was on hand to make a great block, and what he did all evening. I thought, yeah, I should say, all the defence. And then there was one, wasn't there, when it was already 3-0 and Stones ran back and got the ball. It's like they just couldn't get past. Even when they did get past them, they couldn't get past them because Ake and they were all just so on form that they were just getting the ball back and getting rid of the danger every time.
Yeah. And as much as 3 goals was huge for City, like 1 goal for Bayern would have been big to take back to their home ground and give them a platform to work from. But no, they're starting from nothing and up against a defence that don't look like they're conceding goals. So yeah, sort of. I think it was City's best performance in the Champions League and by far the best result they've had, I think. The Real Madrid game last season was pretty spectacular, but then they ended up going out in spectacular fashion in the second leg in the wrong way. So for getting the job done, like 3-0 is huge.
Absolutely. I mean, mentions as well, of course, to Rodri, that amazing goal, his first in the Champions League. A typical Rodri performance, other than that, as we know. And then you say the wide forwards, Grealish and Bernardo. I thought Grealish, he's just come such a long way, and I think everyone kind of had the kind of image of him as being, maybe because of his accent, he's a working class lad and he's had his issues when he was younger and whatnot. Seems a bit, maybe not a player who would fit in Guardiola's technical setup, shall we say, to put it diplomatically. And for a year or so, as we've often said, it took him time to get there. But now he's just so on it. He knows when to go. He's tracking back all the time. He's pressing so hard, and crucially, as I think me and Joe touched on the last episode, he's melding that with that kind of guile and ingenuity on the ball that he'd missed a bit when he was trying to get the other side of his game up. And he's just excellent to watch at the minute. And I'm so kind of happy. I loved him at Villa. I thought he was such a great player. And when he went to City, he kind of faded a little bit, that kind of uniqueness, that kind of skill and flair that made him such a kind of interesting and fun player to watch might kind of get sanded off him, but he's managed to do that and still come out with that skill, and he's just in the form of his life at the moment. What just testament to what a manager Guardiola is. He can take any player. There's a lot of talk about Jude Bellingham. Man, if he doesn't want to work with Guardiola, I'd be stunned.
Yeah, it's kind of happened under the radar with Grealish. He's probably been, he's been the best player since the World Cup, but he's just started making every right decision. Like everything he does, whether it's putting the tackle in, or when to press, or where to press, or which ball to play in is just spot on. And like you say, he's added this sort of extra goal threat. He works very, very well with Nathan Ake down the left. Works well with Haaland. He's sort of quietly become one of City's most dangerous players, and did very, very well at Southampton. And I think, I don't think Leicester's right side is the strongest. I don't think there's anyone there that will be looking forward to coming up against a Grealish in this form on the left. And it's taken him time, but I do think he deserves some credit when everyone else struggled so much after the World Cup to get themselves in order. He was on it from minute one. He joked about having ice cream in New York, didn't he, and then blowing out of his rear end when he was brought on for the first game. But he's just picked it up since, and he's playing every game because he is making a difference every game and absolutely deserves the minutes that he gets.
Has kind of Ake's earning this, basically Ake's the left back now, it's his position, he's starting pretty much every match. Has Grealish's upturn kind of coincided with that a bit? Because I feel like Ake being left-footed and always on the staying on, and not an Ake being left back, not being at the back of a free or a centre back or whatever. Him being a left-footed left back and kind of when he comes forward going up the line and allowing Grealish to cut inside rather than it being Cancelo or Lewis or Bernardo even there and kind of operating in that same space. Has that, and a bit more defensive security with Ake as well, because obviously he's not quite as kind of attacking as those three. Has that given him a bit more security to do his work of the pressing and the attacking and open that space for him where maybe the fullback behind him previously was kind of stepping on his toes a little bit, I wonder?
Yeah, I think so. I think, it was probably a bit more unusual having Cancelo on the left just because his role would be so different. At any level of football, you play better when you're playing with people who you're in the same positions every time. So for Grealish to be playing with Ake, you build that relationship. You know more what each other is going to do, and they have, Ake is more defensive, but he does get forward, and Grealish tends to find him when he does. So yeah, I think the two go hand in hand, and in course of City's sort of best players this season, they're both probably top 5.
Mm-hmm. Oh, absolutely. If the most, maybe it's doing him a disservice because it was already good, but I think if there was a most improved award in real life, it'd definitely be Ake's. The way he's come forward, I don't think anyone expected that. But speaking of Cancelo, there was one maybe dampener on the evening. Well, apart from the bucketing down rain, he came on, of course, on loan from City at Bayern, eligible to play though because of the Champions League rules, and loudly booed from across the stadium. Now, and every touch thereafter as well. I thought it was a little bit of a surprise. I don't know, and he's probably going to be coming back at least for a couple of weeks in the summer unless another club wants to sign him. It doesn't really bode well, does it? I was a bit taken aback by that, I must say.
Yeah, it's it doesn't bode particularly well for him. No, for coming back. I always think kind of boos in a match are always a bit pantomime. But yeah, contrast his reaction to like Leroy Sané's reaction. Sané was much better. Cancelo is a winner, and I don't think he's made any secret of the fact since going to Bayern that he's there to win, and he joined and said, yeah, I want to win the Champions League with Bayern, and then Tuchel took over and he said, I hope Tuchel can make me win the Champions League. So, you do have to kind of be aware that there is a club that's paying you wages who is also trying to win the Champions League. So, I don't know if some of that kind of bled into it, but it was not a happy return. I was kind of expecting him to start as well because he'd played two of the 3 under Tuchel really, but was on the bench and cut a pretty lonely figure. So I don't think he's going to win the Champions League with Bayern Munich. and I'm not sure he will play for City again
Well,
this summer.
Well, it'd certainly be intriguing, but a great night for City, one of the great European nights, no doubt. We look forward to the second leg in a couple of weeks. Hopefully, City can advance to the semi-final. But there is the small matter of the Premier League to talk about as well. So we'll just take a short break, and we're back in just a moment to discuss all things Premier League title race. Hello everyone and welcome back to the Talking City podcast. Si, as we said, we didn't get to do an episode earlier this week, it being Easter Monday and whatnot, and everyone away and busy or working and whatnot. But of course, there was the small matter of Premier League drama on the weekend, and it certainly played into City's favour. We'll start with City's own game on Saturday, down on the South Coast at Southampton, a place where City usually have struggled this season. In fact, when they got knocked out there at the Carabao Cup by Nathan Jones' side. But it's no longer Nathan Jones' side, and City no longer having those struggles. An emphatic 4-1 victory, and it just, obviously the Champions League win helps that as well. But in the league and in all competitions, City just really feel like they're hitting their stride now. They've now scored at least 3 goals in their last 5 matches, and the last 2 Premier League games have been won 4-1. And Southampton, as I touched on earlier, there was a half an hour spell in the first half where Southampton did threaten. City looked a little bit shaky. Sulemana, as I say, looking quite dangerous on those flanks, but Haaland gets the goal on his return just before the break, and after that, once that was in, the result was never in doubt, and City made sure of that in the second half.
Yeah, it was one of those games where City kind of start brightly and then fade, and you think, oh no, something bad's going to happen here. But as Guardiola says, these are the games that Haaland has been bought for. You think of him as being bought for Bayern Munich at home and away, but he's also there for those games where they're a bit under the cosh, but they need someone who can finish prolifically and clinically. And he just missed a header. He's still not great at heading, is he?
If only he improved that, he might have 60 goals.
Yeah. But it's just surprising for someone so.
No,
so
he did.
big.
He did.
Peter, the only comparison ever between Peter Crouch and Erling Haaland, but Crouch was never brilliant with his head, but surprisingly good with his feet.
I believe I'm right in saying, I think I've heard this story before. Maybe I'm just completely chatting bubbles, but we'll go with it anyway. I'm pretty sure Haaland, he didn't become a giant until he was well into his mid-teens. So all of his, when he was learning as a youngster in the Norwegian fjords and whatnot, he couldn't just rely on his strength, which I think a lot of young footballers, the ones who have growth spurts when they're young, they kind of steam ahead of everyone else because they're the strongest. They can batter everyone out of the way, and they don't necessarily develop their game as well because they don't need to rely on a sharp touch or a nice pass because they can just bulldoze everyone out of the way. Whereas Haaland, he was a run, or at least a bit smaller and skinnier when he was a kid. So he had to learn how to, and he had a professional footballer dad to help him as well, which I'm sure helped. But he had to kind of develop the technical aspects of his game because he couldn't rely on the strength that he now has, so he can have that, and maybe that's as a result his heading's not the best because he was never a giant learning how to head and doing it well. He was more working on the ball, and as we've seen, so good with the ball at his feet, and that's helped. He's now got the body of a Nordic god, and he can combine that so well. He's got as everyone keeps saying, he's got all the pace and the strength, but he also has all the skill and finishing to go along with it. And it's not as if he's bad in the air, is it? Because his second goal in the game was certainly in the air, and it was blimmin' fantastic. And we touched him earlier, but what a lovely little dink for Grealish to set that up.
Yes, yeah. Well, that's it. Was it the Community Shield where he there were a number of crosses into the box, and he kept going for it with his feet rather than his head. And everyone's like, why is he doing that? He's like, well, that's why. He's just better with his feet. But yeah, I mean, I think essentially
he did score a header, didn't he? Wasn't the first goal a header?
Yeah, the first goal was a header.
No, so it's not doing too bad anyway.
I could have scored that header. Yeah. But I remember going to Southampton in 2020, the 1920 season, and City just battered Liverpool 4-0 at home. I went to Southampton and lost 1-0 from like a 40-yard goal that I think it was a Zinchenko mistake. That's topical for you. Zinchenko messed up and Che Adams lobbed Ederson from like 45 yards. And it was like, 2 steps forward and 1 step back. Whereas, the fact that City backed up the Liverpool game with a ultimately convincing result against Southampton means that, they're just picking up momentum all the time. And, that Haaland goal to make it 3-0 kind of hammered home the message to Southampton, you're not getting anything out of this game. But also just kind of showed how well City are playing. Like, so many of the goals at the minute are really good goals. All 3 against Bayern were really, really well taken. And Southampton and Liverpool, like, they're just playing really good football. They're playing the best football of the season, and they're probably playing better football than anyone else in the league at the minute. So, that's why they're building up so much steam in the title race.
Absolutely, as you say, they just seem to is it 11 unbeaten now? 12 maybe? Like, they've just hit that consistency, and
13.
13. It's not quite a 13-game winning run, is it? Because I know there's a couple of draws in there. But
11 wins and I think 9 wins in a row.
We talked about, didn't we, on it might have been January, February time, how at that time it didn't really look like City could do this, could put these wins together, and now they're finally doing it. And Guardiola seems to have like really settled on his team now. He's got the 11 starters. There's the interchangeable Bernardo for either Gundogan or Mahrez. Foden, when he's fit, we'll see if he fits back in. And then Alvarez comes in if Haaland isn't playing or De Bruyne is injured. It's like 13 players he's choosing from now. There's consistency there, and it doesn't look like, at least for this season, the way City are playing, that there's any way back in for Walker or Laporte or way in at all for Phillips. It just seems City, providing there's no injuries or disasters, this is how City are going to go till the rest of the season, and you can't really blame them when they're just on that consistent level now.
Yeah, I think it's 9 League and Champions League games that City have played without Laporte. The last 9, I think. He put something cryptic, I think the term is, on his Instagram today about endings and new beginnings and things like that. It's hard to see a way back for him at City, and like Kyle Walker. If you can beat Bayern 3-0 without needing Kyle Walker, then you don't need Kyle Walker for your biggest games. So it remains, I think, the talking point of the season, the way Guardiola has taken the fullback role that he has relied on so heavily for 4 or 5 years and just got rid of all of his fullbacks, and is still setting his team up to do very well in all 3 competitions is incredible.
I mean, Big Sam used to play 4 centre-backs and we get slagged off for it, and now somehow Guardiola's making it in vogue, and I know, I'm not. Funnily enough, City centre-backs are a bit better than Bolton's used to be, and a bit better on the ball. Can basically play anywhere, but it is so strange how it's working out. And it's not, it's either Kanji or Stones and Ake. It's not just. It's not as if City is short on options. They're doing it because it's working.
What has happened to Pep? You're talking about the guy who played Yaya Toure at centre back in the Champions League final because he loves the way midfielders can play. He saw Stones and Otamendi together a few years ago and said, "Nope, I'm going to play Rodri and Fernandinho at centre back instead." And suddenly he's just like, 4 centre backs, please. That's the way to go. It really is incredible. But like I say, they're in such good form. They're just absolutely bossing teams.
Remember all the times Allardyce used to say, if I was called Samiano Allardyce, I'd have been managing Barcelona. Maybe Guardiola's heard that, and he's now going by Joseph Gardner, and he's just going really old school with it and showing everyone up by saying, "Listen, I could play as many centre backs as I want and still win." And it's the maddest thing because 4 centre backs are playing. Laporte isn't one of them, and this time last year, Laporte was the one centre back playing with his ankle hanging off. It's just so mad how things can turn on a sixpence. I've said that twice now.
Yeah. No, it is, and it is the mad world of Pep Guardiola, but it's a very successful world.
Exactly,
And,
exactly.
but it's hard to see anyone getting in ahead of these four centre backs, because they're playing so well every game. And you're like, well, maybe Sheffield United, you play someone else, but like you pointed out, like we're getting to the stage of the season where it will just be the same 11, 12, 13 players who start every game because they can do, because they are built to do that every 3 days, for a short period of time at least, and they will because they're the most informed, so the players Guardiola trusts the most, so they're gonna play. So I think we should probably get used to a lineup similar to the one we saw against Southampton and Bayern for the rest of the season.
Yeah, it's certainly going to make our predicted lineup pieces quite boring. But hey, maybe we'll get them right for once. So every cloud. But
I got 11 for Bayern.
Well done. Oh, I tell you what, it's honestly. It's honestly such a notable occasion that you just have to kind of get a plaque to commemorate it.
Happens once a season, yeah.
Exactly. Who cares? City won 3-0 against Bayern Munich. Simon got the team right. The biggest achievement of the night by far. But the drama of the weekend did come from Anfield, where Arsenal took on Liverpool on Sunday, and what a frantic, enjoyable game it was. Finished 2-2. Arsenal went 2 ahead. And Liverpool came back and he missed a penalty, but still managed to come back. A last-minute equaliser from Roberto Firmino after Trent Alexander-Arnold had like a transformation mid-match and somehow went from the worst defender of all time to back to that really good marauding fullback we've come to know and probably not love on this podcast, but I love him. I think he's a really good player. But it feels, this match, as I said earlier about the Haaland for goal feeling significant, this feels significant as well. Arsenal have had little fumbles. They've lost to Everton. They drew with Brentford, but they bounced back well from this. And that never, maybe it's easy to say in hindsight, but they never felt kind of a killing blow. Whereas this feels like if they can recover from this, they'll do really well. Because this felt like a psychological hammer strike. And it might, as they went to great pains to say, it might end up being a good point. You come away from Anfield, a place you've not won there in 12 years, I think it was. To come away with a point when the way the game was going, the way the tides were turning, it might end up being a good point. But I think as you touched on there, Zinchenko, he's the one who got nutmegged by Alexander-Arnold for that equaliser, and he knew as he sat on the bench, clearly kind of distraught, that it could be proved to be a very costly error, and those 2 points have split it wide open now, and this feels like the first real crack we've seen in Arsenal's otherwise almost kind of peerless attack, because they're still 6 points ahead of City, to be fair, and to be 6 points ahead of this City team now is some achievement.
Yeah, and they drew at Anfield, where last season they lost 4-0. So
exactly,
it's another sign of their improvement. It's just kind of unfortunate for them with the type of point that they got. We've spoken on the podcast about their comeback wins and how uplifting they must have been to go from behind and then come back. Well, to be 2-0 up and then concede one and then concede a penalty and have Salah miss it, and Liverpool are so fragile with their confidence, like City showed that the other week. To have Liverpool then come back, still get the point, and then Arsenal were kind of hanging on by the end. Liverpool kind of really battering down the door to get all 3 points. So I think it felt like if Arsenal won at Liverpool, they would be clear favourites for the title, and because they haven't, it's now more open again. City have sort of been backed a long way because of their experience, but the form they're now in, it's funny, and it's just like the ongoing battle. When Arsenal were knocked out of Europe, and that was like, oh, that'll be better for them. Well, now Arsenal have had to sort of stew for a week after that draw. Watch City batter one of the best teams in Europe. City playing first again this weekend again, so City could close the gap to 3 points, and then the pressure is on. It's 7 days since you've played, and you need to get a win. So it's going to be. It feels like the title race has swung a bit to City with Arsenal dropping points, but like we say, a point is still a very good result for Arsenal, and also I think City will beat Arsenal at the Etihad, and many others do, but it's not a given, and that is a huge game in terms of how that could really affect the title race.
Yeah, absolutely. I think everything will lie on that. I mean, as you say, if Arsenal, if it had been the other way around and Arsenal had come from 2 down and drew 2-2, last minute drama, it'd be a completely different conversation. Of course, it would be galvanised. They've earned the point, as we've seen. They beat United, Villa, and Bournemouth. I'm going to say with last minute winners, and that felt really like that swell of champions. That Fergie time sort of tackle. Win it late. It's what champions do. All that, but to kind of, I think I should say they got off the hook once with the penalty miss. To then, it's hard to say throw it away because but they had a 2-goal lead and they didn't win. It's never good, is it? And I mean, it was Liverpool, despite all the struggles this year, they have got some very talented players. They beat United 7-0, for God's sake, at Anfield. The last game at Anfield, so it's not as like it's become an easy place to go or anything. But maybe the one thing that has helped them is that Ramsdale right at the end made 2 outstanding saves, probably one of the best saves in the Premier League history of that one, when he was getting into his fingertips. So that can maybe be the sort of the galvanising thing they can cling to. It feels more they did. It's not like the goal was very last minute, last kick of the game. That would have felt even worse. Whereas it does feel more like they got away with it rather than they threw it away just because of how. And I admit, maybe we put too much on these sort of psychological things just to have something to talk about, but I don't know how much the players really think about it. But Ramsdale afterwards said a bit of both. Feels like a point dropped. Obviously we're winning, but at the same time you've come away. So who knows? And we can only find out once the season progresses. But what it does mean is it's basically the league is in both teams' hands. If both teams win all of their games, they will win the title, and that's of course because both teams have to play each other at April 26th. That is the blockbuster of all blockbusters. If both teams win all their games until then, that is going to be some match.
Yes, and I think City have sort of got a bit of help by drawing Sheffield United in the FA Cup semi, because with Arsenal coming 3 days later, if they'd had to play a Brighton or a United, they might have been a bit more drained. Not to take anything away from Sheffield United, and I will fully apologise on the podcast after when we're talking about Sheffield United beating City, but yeah, it was the easiest draw on paper for them, and Arsenal have lost to City twice this season. They've lost to them at the Etihad already, and they're looking at a team that have just put 7 past Leipzig, 6 past Burnley, 4 past Liverpool, 3 past Bayern.
24 in 5 games, I think it is now.
Yeah. So it will be. I think City's game with Leicester this weekend. I think that's City's last league game before they play Arsenal. So that will be.
Yes, it is
a huge occasion, and it's midweek, isn't it? So it's an evening match. And yeah, everything is aligning in the same or in a similar way, really, to kind of how much narrative there was around Bayern coming to City with Tuchel and Cancelo and Sane. There will be Jesus and Zinchenko and Arteta coming, and there is so much on the race, and it will be, you've got this City team who are used to being in these positions, and that win over Liverpool in the 18-19 season was one of the best games at the Etihad, full stop. But you've got this hungry Arsenal team who have been out in front for so long, so I would expect them to be further in front because they've got one more game than City before then. But we are getting towards those final few matches, and yeah, it's a really exciting. All you can ask for is an exciting season, and for both teams to be able to win it at this stage is is really good. You've got a decent relegation battle and a decent top four battle and a really, really good title race, which City have done very, very well again to be heavily involved in.
Yeah, and it's interesting that City are doing the chasing for once. We're not used to that. But as you say, how the fixtures kind of line up this week. City play Leicester at home, whereas Arsenal are away at West Ham, and then their game before before the match with City, while City will be in FA Cup semi-final action that weekend. They play Southampton on Friday the 21st at home. So 2 games you'd expect this Arsenal team to win. So they could have, again, a healthy lead over City by the time the two meet. So it's not like the game is going to immediately put City on top, so it's not going to have that psychological edge on it where City overtake them and they're now leading, because obviously City will have 2 games in hand to come afterwards, but obviously it'll be such a blow. Now, let's say City play Leicester. I don't know if there's much to actually say about the match. It's interesting, I suppose, that Brendan Rodgers is gone. It'll be Dean Smith's first match in charge, but the way Leicester are going, they look almost kind of nailed on to go down. They're a team completely devoid of any sort of confidence or absolutely anything of any note, really. So I think we can all safely assume City will win with the same starting 11 we've just been talking about. So instead of kind of delving into that, you said at the start, City has been so successful under Guardiola, and the treble is on. Like, it really is on, and City could win the league. They could have a FA Cup final against United after if City win the league, and they get to the FA Cup final, and United also get to the FA Cup final, and they get to the Champions League final. That FA Cup final will be 4 City are playing a team in the Champions League final which you'd expect them to beat in either Inter, Benfica if they get a comeback, Napoli or AC Milan. You'd expect City to beat any of those, even if Napoli are really good. United will be standing in the way if they get to the FA Cup final, of course, which is no given they're playing Brighton. But United, a Manchester Derby FA Cup final, the first ever FA Cup Manchester Derby final, could be for United in their heads to stop City overshadowing their greatest ever achievement of the treble in 1999. Like, you don't get much more, much more drama, much more stakes, much more on the line than that. And that prospect is absolutely, you started laughing there and for good reason, because it's almost too just massive to comprehend. It certainly do the site a load of good, I'll tell you that. That'll be some day. I'll tell you that for free. We'll do well that day.
Yes, yeah. It's that would be a hell of a day. That would be very much not enjoyable for most there. I don't think anyone would.
Might have to put that one off, to be honest.
Anyone would enjoy the build up to it, and I think there'd be plenty queasy afterwards. But yeah, it's not really been talked about, and we kind of had. United were sort of strangely happy to talk up the quadruple at one point in the season, or a quadruple, because they're not in the Champions League, are they? But just because City have had like so many problems after the World Cup, and because Arsenal have been so good, it's kind of not been spoken about that it could be the treble, and Guardiola won't hear a word of it. For obvious reasons, because he just doesn't want that distraction or anything like that. But when you see them beat Bayern in the way they have, and when you see them in the form they are in the Premier League the way they have, I think Brighton are probably the most dangerous opponents they could. Well, I don't know. United don't seem to be in great form. United haven't been in great form since the.
Yeah, they've had a lot of injuries. Really. A lot of injuries, kind of scraping results by, which is good, but not scary.
Yeah, and continue to have injuries. Rashford's out now for we don't know how long, and things like that. So whereas Brighton are playing very well when they're not being done over by refereeing decisions. So I'm sure should City get past Sheffield United in the FA Cup, they would maybe rather play Brighton, just because it might be a tougher game, but you take away all that narrative that you've layered up.
I've also just thought United, you mentioned United, they could still win a treble. It could I'm not quite
Yeah.
sure what the Europa League final is, but United could actually also go for their own treble at the same day as well. So there's so much.
Yeah.
Oh, mate, I hope it comes to pass because United City best not lose at Sheffield United. No, I'll put it that way because I think a lot of I'm sure the TV execs are hoping for the same thing as well.
Yeah. So it's just a really, really exciting end to the season, and City have worked themselves into this position where, they could actually win everything, and nobody's really been talking about it for good reason, because you don't until you get to this time of year. But it's like, oh, it's on. So I mean, this City team have achieved so much under Guardiola, but this would be, the makings of a team that would go down in history forever. I think, and they've obviously done the Centurions and back-to-back titles, and were they to get the treble that only United before have ever won, they would just automatically go up as one of the best ever teams in the history of football.
3 titles in a row as well. That's on, isn't it?
Yeah,
that's only been done by United, isn't it?
Yeah, and 5 in 6. So it's the stakes are enormous, and you can never tell in knockout games, and they're 6 points behind in the league. But the way they're playing at the minute, you would not want to bet against them. I think their odds of getting the treble have halved in a week after Southampton and Bayern.
Well, I hope
a
some
lot of money going on them.
Yeah, I hope some plucky City fans back that when it was a lot higher odds, because it's certainly looking, if not likely, at least very plausible, and exciting times indeed. And we'll of course be here to cover all of it. But for now, that is the end of this episode of the Talking City podcast. We'll be back early next week with any luck to talk about the weekend's match with Leicester, and look forward to that second leg against Bayern Munich. Hopefully it'll be just as thrilling as the first. But until then, you can of course keep up to date with all the latest City news, expert analysis, and of course all the updates from Saturday's game over on manchestereveningnewscom/Manchester City. You can get fill your feed with our articles on Twitter at ManCityMen. Get us on Facebook at Manchester Evening News -Manchester City. And if you want to watch this podcast in living colour, see Simon stifle laughter after I say fill your feed, you go over to YouTube with Manchester Evening News -Manchester City. Get that in, as I say, in motion and colour. What more could you want? But until next week, everyone, thank you very much for listening or watching, and we'll see you then. Bye bye for now. Ta-ra.